Bryce Dallas Howard recently gave an interview where she was quoted as saying she made much less money in comparison to Chris Pratt in the Jurassic World franchise. This caused a lot of discussion around the discrepancy in equal pay between men and women, and specifically how men and women are paid differently in cinema. As a big fan of Bryce Dallas Howard and the Jurassic World franchise, I obviously think she deserved equal pay, and potentially I think she might have even deserved more than Chris Pratt for her work on the series. So in today's video, I thought it would be a good opportunity to explain why I think that Bryce Dallas Howard's character is the true protagonist of the Jurassic World franchise.
Stars and Stripes!
Hello and welcome to another Carrot Scraps video, and by another I mean the 107th. Now before we get started today, I wanted to make a couple of things clear up front. We'll be lightly touching on some serious topics, so I feel like it's important to say that up front. So while I'll be talking mostly about fun dinosaur movies, just try to keep that in mind as the video goes on. Now one of the things that I wanted to make sure that people were aware of is that this video is not meant to disparage Chris Pratt. I'm not sure why, but when I talked about Bryce Dallas Howard's interview recently on Twitter, a lot of people thought that I was attacking Chris Pratt for some reason, and that's absolutely not the case. If anything, Bryce makes it pretty clear that he was absolutely an ally in her struggle in this case. In the same interview where she talks about being paid considerably less than him, she makes it clear that he was standing by her side and advocating for her as well. So at least in this scenario, there's no part of me that wants to attack Chris Pratt. If anything, this video is about Bryce Dallas Howard specifically, her character Claire, or the film industry in general. And I also wanted to say that if you wanted to know more about Bryce's interview and more about the subject, I'm going to leave some links in the description to help you out. I'm only going to be scratching the surface of the implications of her interview, and if I'm being completely transparent, I'm talking about some pretty trivial stuff in the grand scheme of things. At the end of the day, I think that Bryce should have been paid the same as Chris for these movies. And while I'm going to explain the plots of various dinosaur movies to illustrate that point, it's important to keep in mind that that stuff doesn't really matter as much. The two of them were the protagonists of the Jurassic World franchise, and they deserved equal pay. And Bryce's account sheds light on something that tons of other women experience across the world. So just keep in mind that there's way more depth to this conversation if you choose to research it, which I encourage you to do so. But for now, we're going to talk about dinosaur movies specifically. And even more importantly than all of that, this is hard for me to say, but Carrot Scraps Summer is canceled. All of the events that we had planned, they're done for now. Temporarily, it's over. Until we can figure out what Carrot Scraps Summer is, it's all put on hold. Now again, in general, I think it's obvious that Bryce Dallas Howard deserves equal pay to a co-star like Chris Pratt. But for those of you who don't think that's the case, I wanted to give some reasons that I think might convince you. The first reason I think that Bryce should have been paid the same or more than Chris in the original Jurassic World movie is because if you watch the behind-the-scenes material, you'll learn that the filmmakers, such as the director Colin Trevorrow and Steven Spielberg, felt very lucky to have Chris Pratt on the cast. Not because he was an established star, but for exactly the opposite reason. You see, they felt lucky because according to them, they didn't know that he would be such a huge star in the future.
That time, I wasn't aware that one of the great character actors that I chose was going to become a hugely successful movie star in the
But he wasn't
year.
when you cast him.
Not at all. No,
Yeah.
I just cast a great actor.
Now, I know it's hard to believe now that Chris Pratt wasn't the megastar that he is today before 2014. Many people have tried to say that Chris earned more than Bryce Dallas Howard in these movies because he was a bigger star, and especially because of his films like Guardians of the Galaxy. The thing is, while Jurassic World came out in 2015, it was filmed before Guardians of the Galaxy was even released. As a result, you can't argue that Chris was hired because of that movie, since it hadn't come out yet. Again, this is evidenced by the filmmakers talking about how pleasantly surprised they were to have hired someone that would eventually become such a superstar. The implication being that while they valued his acting skills when they cast him, they didn't see him as a superstar at the time. So that alone, in my opinion, is enough to put him and Bryce on equal footing as actors in the same film. Since many times when the subject of equal pay is brought up in the context of film and gender, many people bring up the comparable fame of specific actors and that being the reason why they're paid differently. But again, with this admission from the filmmakers, it's hard for me to believe that in this case. On the other hand, something else to keep in mind is that Bryce Dallas Howard has been in the film industry her whole life. Before Jurassic World, she had starred in multiple films, including an Oscar award-winning movie. Now obviously, the Jurassic World franchise made her even more famous, and Bryce Dallas Howard has said that in interviews herself. But she was an established actress in the industry at the time. time. So again, these two details to me at the very least put these two actors on equal footing in terms of their pay. But there's one other detail that I think is tremendously important to consider that causes me to suggest that Bryce Dallas Howard should have been paid even more than Chris in the original film and throughout the franchise. And that's that I think that her character is the protagonist of Jurassic World. So for whatever reason, when people talk about the Jurassic World franchise, I feel as if a lot of people consider Chris Pratt to be the main character of the movies. Even though, in my opinion, if you watch all three films, but especially the first one, not only does Chris Pratt's character and Bryce Dallas Howard's character share the spotlight, but I would argue because of the way that Bryce Dallas Howard's character is handled, that she might be the actual star of the films. And I always find it curious why people don't agree with that perspective. And especially with this news that she was paid less than Chris Pratt, it does leave me scratching my head. So let me try and explain why I think that Claire is the main character of the original Jurassic World, as well as the entire trilogy. In the original Jurassic World, Bryce Dallas Howard's character Claire Dearing is the first to appear on screen before Chris Pratt's character Owen. Not only are Claire's sister and nephews some of the first characters to be established on the screen, but Claire's central conflict as a character takes center stage at the start of the movie and remains a prime focus throughout the film. You see, Claire's nephews are visiting Jurassic World, and this occasion highlights the fact that Claire isn't as empathetic as she could be. Specifically, the film shows her being emotionally distant with her family and children in general, in addition to not seeing the cloned dinosaurs as animals and instead as assets. These two aspects of her character are established early on, and her growth as a character who changes is one of the main focuses of the film. By the end of the first Jurassic World movie, Claire is more empathetic to the dinosaurs, her nephews, and even Owen. She makes a full arc by the end of the film and begins her arc for the rest of the trilogy. By comparison, Owen Grady doesn't really have an arc to speak of in Jurassic World. His character is somewhat similar to that of Ian Malcolm from the original Jurassic Park. He often gets to say "I told you so" to the people who are making the biggest mistakes in the movie. But Owen isn't an especially deep character. He's a very competent guy whose emotional connection to the dinosaurs in Jurassic World being the core of his character. And when it comes to his flaws, he's pretty immature. Throughout the film, seeing Owen's relationship with Blue the Velociraptor is one of the main focuses of the trilogy. Understanding that relationship and seeing it from new perspectives is a big part of the series. However, it's hard for me to say that Owen grew as much in terms of character development throughout the trilogy and especially the first film. There are definitely changes to his character, but especially when comparing him to Claire, it's difficult to argue her character development isn't more prominent. Now, character development isn't the only way to write a good character, and I'm not necessarily trying to say that Owen is a bad character. I'm just trying to illustrate the point that because of the care that went into depicting the growth and change of Claire, in addition to her amount of screen time compared to Owen, I think I can make the case that her character is the protagonist of that movie. Now, in the Jurassic World sequel, Fallen Kingdom, once again, Claire is presented first in the film, and we learn that she's grown so much from the first film that she now has a non-for-profit group that is dedicated to protecting the dinosaurs from Jurassic World. She's gone from a character that would refer to these animals as an it to someone who is fighting to prevent them from being extinct again, which to me is huge growth in each film, but also between movies. In addition to that, the only reason why Owen is in the movie is because Claire is asked to seek him out and have him join their mission. And throughout Fallen Kingdom, Claire develops her relationship with children, which is something that was established in the first movie. Now, when it comes to Owen, he is a little bit different than he was in the first movie. In this film, it seems as if Owen is way more callous to the dinosaurs that he used to be more empathetic towards in the previous movie, which is an interesting place to find him at the start of the film. However, from my perspective, this doesn't really last very long in the movie, and most of the film shows him being the same with these dinosaurs. He treats them with respect and with empathy. But I will say, though we don't see Owen change in the movie that much, we do get to learn more about his backstory with Blue, and seeing that does flesh out the character a little bit. But overall, I would argue that Claire and Owen share most of the screen time, and that once again, when you compare and contrast them as characters, Claire seems to get the focus in terms of development. Lastly, in the recently released Jurassic World Dominion, Claire is once again the first to appear over Owen. The character who once implied that she would never want to be a parent in the original Jurassic World has now essentially taken that role in the final film. And whether she views herself as a good mother seems to be one of the main conflicts for her in the movie. And again, Owen has changed a bit as well, and he seems much more mature in this entry. If I'm being honest, Jurassic World Dominion has a lot of characters, and so as a result, Claire as a protagonist isn't felt as strongly. I definitely think it's still there, but she doesn't get as much attention as the previous two films because they have like 12 characters to juggle. But this trilogy has still been the continuation of her story specifically. Owen was still an important part of that journey, but her growth as a character is one of the main points of the films. And I hope that I've made my point clear by explaining this. Now, when it comes to talking about Bryce Dallas Howard's character potentially being the protagonist of the Jurassic World movies, I'd like to present this interview from the behind-the-scenes making of documentary of Jurassic World.
To me, it's Claire's movie. Like, she's the one who changes. Like, she's the character I thought we could take from one place and end somewhere else, where she starts off pretty straight-laced, corporate, very uptight somewhat, and you know, is just thinking about numbers and you know, she thinks of the dinosaurs as assets, and it's all about meeting deadlines and, you know, margins and profits, and that's how she thinks running a park like this. And then she gets like thrown into the heart of it, like literally, and by the end of it, she's, you know, a little bit of Owen and has rubbed off on her, and she ends the movie in a different place where she started.
So that was Derek Connolly, a screenwriter for the original Jurassic World movie, talking about how they consider the first film to be Claire's movie, which is pretty significant in my opinion, considering they wrote the film. Now, there's no doubt that a lot of the marketing pushes Chris Pratt as the main character of the films, but when you actually watch the movies and you listen to the testimonials of the people who made the films, I think it becomes pretty clear that most indicators suggest that Bryce Dallas Howard's character is the protagonist of these movies. I really think it's difficult to argue in the face of all of this evidence. I mean, these movies were about that character. Owen Grady is still one of the main characters of the Jurassic World franchise. You could definitely make the case that Owen and Claire share the role as the main protagonist. He's an important character to the franchise, he's a fun character in the series, and I'm not necessarily trying to make a quality judgment about him. However, I hope it's clear after I explained these movies how important Claire is to all of them. If Claire is the protagonist of these movies, the case could be made that she would deserve more pay rather than less, since this story is about that character and she's a more essential part of the story. But at the end of the day, equal pay is the bare minimum when it comes to equal roles. Chris and Bryce shared a lot of screen time together, and they both did a ton of stunts together. These movies took so much energy and effort from them, and it's absolutely disappointing to see that somebody valued Bryce's work less than Chris's. At the end of the day, Bryce is an important part of these movies, and like I've said many times, I think at the very least what Chris and Bryce bring to the franchise is equal, and they deserved equal pay because of that. Now, really quickly, I wanted to remind you of a couple of more things before we go for today. First of all, I wanted to make it clear that when I'm advocating for Bryce to get paid more than Chris when it comes to the Jurassic World franchise, that's not from a mean-spirited or vindictive place. The only reason I framed the video from that perspective was to illustrate just how important her character is to the franchise. She's not some bit player or some side character. I genuinely do think that she's the main character of the franchise. And when it comes to offering an actor a price, that should be taken into consideration. If the majority of your story and its events rest on that actor's shoulders, which I think in a lot of ways it does for Bryce's character Claire. And again, that's not to say that Chris's character Owen isn't important. He's still a main character, and I think you could argue that they share that role. But I'm trying to make it clear that you can't understate Bryce's presence in these movies. The Jurassic World franchise would be very incomplete without Claire. And again, like I keep saying, I genuinely see her as the protagonist of these films. And she's one of the reasons why I love them so much. But more importantly than anything else, Bryce's interview sheds light on a really important subject that affects a lot of people. Pay discrepancies between genders is an awful and complex situation to discuss. And I really appreciate that Bryce Dallas Howard not only approached this subject from a place of respectfulness, but also was brave enough to start that conversation for herself and many other people. Again, it's a really important subject that I've just barely touched on in this video, and I encourage you all to do more research on it. And speaking of important subjects, now that I've had some time to think about it, Carrot Scrap Summer is back. It doesn't matter if I had any plans for Carrot Scrap Summer, or if we know what it is, or what it means, or what we do. It's a state of mind, don't you see? At the end of the day, Carrot Scrap Summer, it is something important. And I'm not gonna cancel it just because I don't know what it is. Okay, anyway, that's gonna do it for this video. I want to thank you so much for watching. If for some reason you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and to subscribe to my channel for more. As regular viewers know, I make a variety of content on my channel, and I'm always gonna make the kind of videos that I want to make. But if you see something you enjoy, make sure to let me know, and I'll try to prioritize that kind of content in the future. If you want to watch me play video games live, you can check me out on Twitch at twitch.tv/carrotscraps, and all my other social media, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram are at carrotscraps as well. So I want to thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Why does my upper lip feels strange? Why does my upper lip feel strange? Stop it. Why does my upper lip feel strange?